One to the sleeper. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. This is Rabia Batul from Rawalpindi Women University. Here we have to start our next chapter, that is Louis Pasteur. Okay, first of all, let's start the text. This chapter is written by Margaret Avery, and it goes like that. Pasteur was born in quite humble circumstances at Dole in Jura district of France in 1822. His father, as a young man, had been one of the Napoleon's conscripts and had won the Cross of Legion of Honor on the field of battle for valor and fidelity. Thus, the son was fortunate in possessing forebears of character and strength. Up till here, the writer has introduced Pasteur as a patriot whose family, especially his father, was uh, also a great warrior, or you can say soldier, and he had been in the army. So he was born in such a circumstances that his love for his country was quite natural, and he was born in Dole in Jura district. Uh, the writer further says, thus the son was fortunate in possessing forebears of character and strength. There is much evidence of the influence of the father on the son, Pasteur showing time after time the strength of his devotion to France. He was perhaps even more of a patriot than of a scientist. For example, in 1848, when Europe was politically upheaved, Pasteur enrolled himself in the National Guard and saying one day in the Place du Panthéon, a sort of altar labeled as Hôtel de la Patrie, promptly placed on it all his worldly wealth, that was 150 francs. So, time to time, Pasteur had been displaying his love for his country. For example, he devoted himself uh, for the army and for his country, and this devotion was once reflected when he donated 150 francs for the National Guard army. Again, in 1870, he was returning from Germany to France, and, and at Strasbourg heard that France was on the verge of war with Germany, whereupon he hurried to Paris and was exceedingly disappointed when the military authorities refused to enroll him in the National Guard, on the score that a half-paralyzed man was useless in the army. So when Pasteur tried to join the army against uh, Germany during the war, he was refused on the grounds of his physical uh, disability, which was a stroke of paralysis which he uh, got during his research work on the silkworm disease. He had a paralytic stroke 2 years before in 1868 and never shook off the physical effects, though after 2 years he was able to continue his mental work before, as well as ever before. So here I have selected different pictures. First picture shows Pasteur in his laboratory doing some research. But Louis Pasteur was a French biologist, microbiologist, and chemist, famous for his discoveries of the principles of vaccination, microbial fermentation, and pasteurization. Okay, second picture is of his house, and which is in Arbois. It is Louis Pasteur's house in Arbois is a unique historical site, still infused with the spirit of the scientist. The house is preserved in its original state, exactly as it was when Louis Pasteur was alive. And next picture is of Franco-Prussian War or Franco-German War. It is often referred to in France as the War of 1870 as well. It was a conflict between the Second French Empire and the German states of the North German Confederation. It was led by the Kingdom of Prussia. Now let's see the next paragraph. However, to return to his boyhood, he was 2 years old. The family moved from Dole to Arbois, where his father bought a small tannery. And here Pasteur was sent to school at the communal college, where at first he showed no interest whatever in books or study, but devoted his attention to fishing and making sketches of his companions. However, directly he grasped the fact that his education was a great drain on the family funds. He set himself in earnest at school and soon developed a passion for work which marked the whole of the rest of his life. So, this was all about his early education, in which he did not seem interested in the beginning, but later on realizing that his education was causing a, a big cost to his family, he became serious in his studies. The next paragraph states the college at Arbois did not teach philosophy, and so, after a time, Pasteur went to Byzantium, a bigger place, with better educational provision. Here he graduated in science and arts and was given a post on the college staff. So these are the two pictures. First is of the communal college and second one is Byzantium, France. He was already much interested in chemistry, too much so for the professor of the subject at Byzantium, whom Pasteur used to embarrass with unanswerable questions. The professor in question disapproved of saying I don't know and used to try to keep Pasteur in his place by telling him that questions were to be asked by the teacher of the scholar and not vice versa. So he was deeply interested in chemistry and he was so well versed in this subject that he used to confuse even the teacher by asking different questions, and the teacher would get afraid of his intelligence and he would get afraid of his questioning and he would try to keep him in his place. In 1842, when he was 20, he went in for the entrance examination to the great École Normale in Paris and came out 14th on the list, whereupon he refused to enter, being so disappointed at not getting a higher place. He took the examination again in the following year and was fourth on the list, which apparently more or less satisfied him. So this is about his getting admission in École Normale in Paris. First picture is of École Normale, where was he was succeeding in getting admission. The École Normale is one of the most selective and prestigious graduate schools in Paris, France. It is one of the French uh, grandes écoles and a constituent member of PSL University. At this point, one may say a word about his private affairs. In 1848, at the age of 26, he became deputy professor of chemistry in the University of Strasbourg, and here he met his future wife, who was the daughter of the rector of the Strasbourg Academy. They were married in 1850, and it seems that Pasteur was so buried in his work on the wedding day that he entirely forgot the ceremony and had to be fetched by a friend. The marriage, however, was extremely happy, and the wife seems to have been an important factor in her husband's work. So this is a word about his married life, how he uh, got married with the daughter of the rector of Strasbourg Academy, and he was such a devoted person that even he forgot the ceremony of his wedding, and he was brought to the wedding ceremony by one of his friends. So this is the picture of University of Strasbourg, and the second picture is of Mary Pasteur, right? And she was a scientist, a scientific assistant and co-worker of her husband, the famous French chemist and bacteriologist Louis Pasteur. In 1860, the French Academy offered a prize for the solution of the problem whether spontaneous generation was or was not a fact, and Pasteur entered from the competition and settled the matter once and for all in the negative, proving that if a substance be sufficiently heated or destroyed, all life, and if the air is in contact with it to be filtered so that it is free of germs, and then the substance does not alter, means bacteria do not develop in it. So spontaneous generation was uh, a critical question or the problem of the field of science at that time in 1860. And the question was that either the germs can be produced uh, or the bacteria can develop in a substance which is away from all life and which has no contact with the air. Uh, and Pasteur proved it that this idea was wrong. If the conditions are like these, that any substance, it is without any it lies without any contact with the air. So the spontaneous generation is not possible. And I would like to explain once again that Pasteur won a prize for the solution of the problem whether spontaneous generation was or was not a fact. So this was the major issue of that time in 1860, which was settled by Pasteur. Pasteur answered this question in negative. He proved it if this a substance is sufficiently heated, all germs they die out, and if such substance has no connection with air, the bacteria do not grow. As usual, his opponents said that they had obtained opposite results, so Pasteur asked for arbitration, and the Academy appointed a commission before which Pasteur and his adversaries were to repeat their experiments. When Pasteur said that spontaneous generation is not possible, it was challenged by his opponents. So, what was decided that Pasteur and his opponents, they would have their experiments, they would repeat their experiments before a commission to make the final decision, right? Then Pasteur appeared loaded with apparatus. On the appointment day, Pasteur appeared loaded with apparatus. His opponents, however, had none. They said the weather was unfavorable and they would like to wait. The commission very reasonably refused. Pasteur did his experiment successfully and won the prize. In the course of these experiments, Pasteur found that some germs are very difficult to destroy by heat. For example, milk developed bacteria even after several minutes boiling, but after raising the temperature 10 centigrade above boiling point, he found that no bacteria were left alive. This work on spontaneous generation was of great value because it stimulated other scientists to study the habits of germs, and much of our modern knowledge of these invisible but very active plants sprang from Pasteur's discovery. So Pasteur was the first man who took first step towards the study of the habits of germs, and it proved very important in the later investigations or discoveries. Okay, so here are different pictures which are related to the uh, paragraph which we have read right now. The next writer says, this brings us on to 1870, when France and Germany were plunged into war, and Pasteur, ever intensely a lover of France, was filled with sorrow and anxiety, and with loathing of Germany, meaning hating Germany. He wrote to the University of Bonn, which had bestowed on him the degree of the Doctor of Medicine, asking him that his name should be removed from the faculty of the university, and returning his diploma, of which he speaks thus: today the sight of this parchment is odious to me, and I feel offended at seeing my name placed under the patronage of a name doomed henceforward to execration by my country, that of Rex Guilmus. What does all this mean? That he was awarded by the degree of Doctor of Medicine by the University of Bonn, which is a German university. When the war started between France and Germany, he proved once again his patriotism, his mad love for his country, by returning his degree to the University of France with these famous words of him. Here you can see the picture of University of Bonn. Okay. Next, having offered himself as a soldier, where now he was refused on the score of physical incapacity, this unconquerable man turned to the sword of science and took up the study of brewing, in order to discover a method whereby France might produce beer as good as that manufactured in Germany. So, if you remember in the beginning, I have told you that when Franco-German war started, he offered himself as a soldier in the National Guard army, but he was refused because he had paralysis, and being refused on the physical grounds because of this physical incapacity or inability, he decided to uh, mm, start a war against uh, Germany by enhancing the scientific research in the field of brewing, so that France can uh, prepare as good beer as Germany was doing, as it was manufactured by Germany. He imparted his discoveries to the English brewers as well as to the French, with the rather illuminating remarks, we must make some friends for our beloved France. In 1876, this work was published in a book called Etudes sur la Berry, which has been translated into English and is the best known of Pasteur's books in England, where it has been of tremendous value in the brewing industry. Huxley once said that Pasteur's work on fermentation alone saved France more than enough to pay the indemnity of the Franco-German War. So his devotion for his country, it worked so good that he shared his discoveries with English brewers and as well as with the French brewers, so that both of them they can work collaboratively, and he also wants to make develop friendship with England, uh, and he said about this that we must make some friends for our beloved France, and his work was published in the famous book, and it was of great value, of tremendous value in the brewing industry. So Huxley, the famous prose writer, famous English prose writer, he said that Pasteur's work on fermentation, it is of such a great value that and it paid so much to France that it became able to pay the indemnity of the Franco-German War. Here I need to explain something about brewing. Um, uh, and what is brewing? It is a production of beer by steeping in a starch source, commonly cereal, grain, the most popular of which is barley, uh, in water and fermenting the resulting sweet liquid with yeast. So this is um, how we can explain brewing. And what is fermentation? Fermentation is a metabolic process that produces chemical changes in organic substances, though the action is enzymes. In biochemistry, it is narrowly defined as the extraction of energy from the carbohydrates in the absence of oxygen. So this is simply we can explain fermentation. And in Urdu, we use a word for it that is called khamir. Okay. However, Pasteur's work on fermentation did not stop short here. It had far more important effects on medicine, surgery, and public health, for it was the starting point for Lord Leicester's work on inflammation of wounds. Means Pasteur's work of fermentation, it was not restricted only with the production or manufacturing of good beer. It also helped a lot in the field of medical science because Lister's work on inflammation of wound, it was aided by Pasteur's discoveries or Pasteur's work on fermentation. So Lister's work on inflammation of wound, which in those days caused endless trouble after operations, often making amputation necessary, and frequently even this was not enough to save patients' life. So inflammation of wound was such a serious problem that even after the surgery, the wounds will not heal, and amputation was considered necessary. And even after that serious step, the patient's life was not guaranteed. The patient would die. About 33% of deaths from major operations occurred in pre-Listerian days, with the result that surgeons were unwilling to operate except as a last and desperate resort. Now Pasteur's discovery that fermentation was due to bacteria set Lister wondering whether inflammation was not also a type of fermentation due to bacteria getting into the bone. So this is how his discovery helped Lister in understanding the habits of germs. And as a result of a series of brilliant researches, he proved that this was so, and that if only germs were excluded from wounds, inflammation was averted. Now let me explain the two important terms used in this passage. First one is amputation. What is amputation? As you can see in the picture, amputation is the removal of a limb by trauma, medical illness, or surgery. As a surgical measure, it is used to control pain and disease process in the affected limb, such as the malignancy or gangrene. In some cases, it is carried out on individual as the preventive surgery for such problems. Uh, so, amputation means cutting off the affected limb to stop the growth of the disease. And what is inflammation? Here you can see the picture of a localized amputation. It is a localized physical condition in which part of the body becomes reddened, swollen, hot, and often painful, especially as a reaction to injury or infection. So I hope that you might have understood what do we mean by inflammation of wounds. The antiseptic method in surgery has led on to the aseptic method of today, where the ideal is to keep the patient's skin free from germs so that the living tissues need not be soaked in carbolic, which tends to destroy the tissues as well as the germs. This must remind you uh, the problem which we have discussed while studying Sir Alexander Fleming, that antiseptic method would fail at one point when the germs were already inside the human body, and use of antiseptic drugs or medicine, what it was doing, it was also destroying the living tissues as well as the germs. So means it was harmful for the body as well as for the disease. Hence, though the instruments and the doctor's hands and everything else are rigorously disinfected, the wound is not thus treated unless it be an old wound already infected. The enormous value of this work is shown by the fact that the death rate today in major operation has fallen to about 1%. So all this credit goes to Pasteur's discoveries. Here we can see the picture of a patient getting operated on the table with the help of by using the carbolic acid on the instruments. Okay, to return to Pasteur, the achievement by which he is best known to the man in the street, I mean to the common man, that is, his work on disease was led up to by an investigation into which he was almost forced by the French government. Right? So we are going to read about the major achievement for which he is best known, and in which he was forced by the French government. This was the result of a mysterious epidemic of silkworm diseases, which for 15 or 16 years had been devastating the silk industry in the south of France. The south of France was famous for growing silkworms, and it used to be considered a rich industry of the area, but it was being devastated or being destroyed by the silkworm diseases, and French government requested Pasteur to work on the problem. Now, the keeping of silkworms was one of the chief home industries of the peasantry of the part of France. Practically every family set aside the best room in the house for rearing and tending of silkworms. The women got up even during the night to supply the worms with fresh mulberry leaves and to see that the temperature of the room was just right. And in the region, the common greeting on meeting a friend is said to be uh, not how do you do, but how are your silkworm doing. So from this you can understand how important this industry was for the country of France, and how people of the south of France, they were so pertinent, they were so keen in uh, tending and rearing the silkworms. And common, even the common greeting was not how do you do or how are you. When people meet each other, their common greeting was how are your silkworms doing. Here are the pictures of the silkworms and of mulberry leaves, which were used for as a feed of the silkworms. Until 1849, the industry had flourished consistently, but in 1849 the moths were attacked by disease. Right? The silkworms, moths mean the worms. They were diseased. They were attacked by the disease. It was thought at first that the eggs were at fault, and fresh ones were brought from the other countries. And for one season, this cured the disease, but it reappeared in the first generation of the descendants of these imported worms, and so the inhabitants were driven to import fresh eggs each year. So the problem was so great that each year the farmers, they have to import fresh eggs. Soon, however, the disease spread to the neighboring countries until Japan was the only silk producing country free from disease. Right? So this was the situation. This reduced the silk growers to despair. Mean the silk farmers or growers, they became extremely disappointed. Thousands of the families were faced with ruin, right? they were financially destroyed. The things were so serious that in 1865 the government asked Pasteur to investigate the disease. At first he refused on the ground that he was a chemist and not a naturalist and had never touched a silkworm in his life. But he pleaded ignorance uh, in vain. I mean, government did not accept any of his excuse. So much the better, replied Mr. Dumas, who bore the message from the government. You will only have the ideas which come to you from your own observation. So this, coupled with his sympathy for the people of the devastated region, overcame his reluctance, and he set out for Alice, a town in the Silk District. So he finally was convinced to do his research and tell his observation to the government, and he set for Alice, a town in the Silk District. There is the picture of the eggs of silkworm disease. These are the diseased eggs, right? Now, earlier observers had noted microscopic grains or corpuscles in the bodies of the diseased worms, but nobody had succeeded in finding a remedy, right? Um, until Pasteur suggested collecting the eggs laid by each moth separately and only keeping those derived from healthy parents. So Pasteur found the solution by giving instructions to the silk grower that they should collect the eggs, but they should be collected in the separate groups laid by each moth separately, and the diseased eggs they should be removed away, right? The only way in which this could be done was by use of the microscope. So this process cannot be done without using microscope, and Pasteur realized that this instrument would be a strange and terrifying thing to the patients, so he tried to reassure them by telling them that this little girl of eight that his little girl of 8 years old was quite at home with it. In addition, he directed the silkworm rearers' attention to the need of avoiding overcrowding, uncleanliness, overheating, and unhealthy conditions generally, since these weakened the insects and made them more liable to the disease. So, as Pasteur suggested, that the eggs laid by each silkworm or moth they should be collected separately, and it was impossible without the use of microscope. And he made the silk growers or the simple farmers at ease uh, to use this instrument by telling them that his even an 8 year old girl can use it easily. And to remove the disease, he suggested few other ways like overcrowding of the silkworms, uncleanliness, overheating, and unhealthy conditions. So this was all about today's lecture. This is the part one of our chapter, Louis Pasteur. In the second part, we will see the further discoveries of this great scientist and bacteriologist. So it was all about today's lecture. Allah Hafiz.